Hey guys, if you want to become a better archer, better bow hunter, you've came to the right place. I'm Levi Morgan, this is Bow Life Boot Camp, and we're about to dive into everything archery. Hey everybody, welcome to Bow Life Boot Camp. On this episode, I'm going to talk to you about stabilization, something that's very important, very crucial to you, to me, to anybody wanting to be a better archer, a better bow hunter. Stabilization is something that's been overlooked for a long time, especially in the hunting world. Obviously, in the competition world, I feel like a lot of people have a pretty good handle on stabilization and its importance because we're trying to hit something so small, trying to aim the best we possibly can. Hunting scenarios, I feel like a lot of times people will sacrifice how well they aim and how well their bow is balanced for weight. And they're going to cut down to one tiny little front bar. I see it all the time on their hunting bow, no stabilizer at all. And when you add a rest, except for this integrate rest from QAD, which is inline, or a sight and a quiver, and you have weight on one side of your bow, and you don't have anything to counter that on the other side of your bow, there's no possible way that your bow is going to be balanced at full draw. So, when I go and start to set up a stabilizer, or I set up my bow, once I have my sight level and everything done, before I tune my arrows though, because stabilization will change the tune of your bow. So before you even go to tune your bow, you're going to want to set your stabilizers up. If I take this bar, if I tune my bow and then I take this bar and I move it out, it changes the paper tear on my bow because it changes how that bow reacts as it fires. So make sure before you tune your bow, you get your bow really close to where it's going to be as far as your balance and the way you have your bars set up. So as you see, I have a pretty long front bar here. This is actually a 15-inch micro hex from Bee Stinger, and on the back I have a 10. And you might be thinking, that's crazy that you shoot that long of a bar bow hunting. And while every bow I get is different, and this is the 31.5-inch VXR, I always have a pretty similar stabilizer setup, and there's two reasons why I use a long front bar. One of them is for spotting and stalk purposes. When I'm spotting and stalking and I have an arrow knocked, and I want to set my bow down on the ground and lean it up against my leg to glass, if I have a short stabilizer, I can't do that. I have to lay it down on its side because my broadhead and arrow will dig into the dirt. So I use a long bar. That's one of the benefits, not really the reason why, but it's definitely one of the perks of using a long bar is my bar will hit and keep my arrow and my broadhead off the ground. Secondly is the longer your bar, the lighter your overall setup can be when you're trying to achieve balance. And that might not make sense to you. You think, well, how is that possible? Well, it's because this bar, this carbon bar, is a lot lighter than these weights on the front. And the shorter this bar is, back and front, the more weights I have to add to achieve that leverage. So I want to use a fairly long carbon bar, but don't be an idiot. You don't want to run a 30-inch front bar hunting, or at least I don't. It's going to clang all over everything, get in the way all the time. A 15 is about as long as I'm ever going to go with a front bar for hunting. But it allows me to have a little bit of weight out front to achieve that leverage I want, and a little bit of weight out back, an overall light setup for me, just because I'm running a little longer bar. So I'm running a 15 out front with 4 ounces and a 10 out back with about 12 to 14 normally on the back. Works for me. But when I go to set up a bow, back to kind of the process, I want to make sure my sight is level. I'll have my rest bolted on, but I'm not going to have it tuned, just so I can put an arrow in and come to full draw. What I want to do is I'm going to pull back and start aiming at a dot. 20, 30 yards, doesn't really matter. I just want to get a good feel for how my pin is sitting in that. And so when I'm starting to balance my bow front to back, I'm going to pull back and aim at that dot, and I want to watch what my pin wants to do. If my pin wants to constantly dip low, dip low, dip low, a lot of people think, well, my bow's too heavy. I need to lighten my bow up. 99 times out of 100, it's not too heavy, it's balanced wrong. Actually, what I'm going to do is add more weight to my bow. I'm going to add an ounce or two to the back and see if that helps. If I do get to where I feel like it's overall just getting too heavy, I can accomplish that same thing by just taking weight off the front. You're changing the balance of the bow. The opposite of that, if my pin always wants to come out the top of the dot, I'm either going to take weight off the back or I'm going to add an ounce or two to the front. Now, when you start adding weight to the front, because your front bar is normally longer and has more leverage, 1 ounce on the front does as much as 3 or 4 ounces will do on the back. So be very careful when you start adding or taking weight off the front. It's a pretty drastic change to your sight picture. That's why I always really try to tune with my back bar when I'm talking fine tuning. Once I have that really good, I feel like my pin wants to sit good up and down, then I go to my left and right balance. So what I'm trying to accomplish with this bar as far as balance goes, left and right, is I'm going to loosen this bar when I'm setting it up. I've got it locked down now because it's where I want it. But I want to loosen this bracket up just to where I can apply pressure with my hand and move this bar in and out, up and down, so I don't have to keep re-loosening and re-tightening the bolts while I'm out there trying to get my setup right. So what I'll do is I'll pull back, close my eyes, and then I want to look at my level. And if it's sitting to one side, doesn't matter which side, say it's sitting to that side, I'm going to let down, I'm going to pull this V-bar bracket and push it out just slightly. Keep doing that over and over until I can pull back and look at my sight and it's perfectly level. Let down, do it again. Pull back, anchor in, get my grip exactly like I want it, open my eyes, and I want that bubble to be perfectly level at full draw. Then I'll tighten everything back down, lock it back down, and you're going to have a pretty good setup to start. You can go ahead and tune and get all that. You might have to come back and add an ounce here or there, or tweak it just a little later as you kind of shoot the setup more, but that's a good starting point where I can go ahead and tune my bow. I'm not going to have any drastic changes to my stabilizer setup. It's very important to me, guys. You know, hunting, to me, taking the life of an animal is as serious or more serious than shooting in a world championship. And I'm not willing to sacrifice any accuracy when it comes to my hunting bow. This is really just a mini tournament rig, and that's how I look at it. I've been forced to find what works best for accuracy, consistency, aiming, downrange impact, everything. And so I have transferred that into my hunting rig. And I think if you do that, you'll find it'll make you, way more consistent, way more accurate, because if I don't have a perfect balance, I have to influence my bow with my grip to get it to level. And what you're doing is torquing the bow. There's no way around that. So you want to achieve a perfect balance with your setup. And you will be such a more confident archer, a more confident hunter. When you pull back and your heart's beating 100 miles an hour and you don't have your bow balanced, your bow is going to be all over the place. There's no weight to hold it in place. There's no home base for that to go. You don't want to have to think about leveling your bow at full draw. You want it to level itself. One less thing you got to worry about in the heat of the moment. Make sure that you incorporate stabilization and balance into your setup, and it will make you a better archer.